All right, so the first thing I want to do is share my screen again and show you the image that I had up. Um, and I want to tell you a little bit about it. Hopefully everyone can see it. Should be fine, I would think. Um, this is an image called Towards Clarity, and it's a painting by a friend of mine, someone I've known for a long time. Her name is Eugenia Ortiz, and she is an intuitive painter. She channels energy and she paints according to that guidance. And to me, there's a lot going on here that I wanted to just share, share my thoughts and point out. Um, so the first thing I notice is the play between the darkness and the light. You can see that down at the bottom, there are bits of light in that dark area. And then even at the top, there's darkness within the light. And there's a lot of movement here too. There's a lot of texture. It seems to suggest that there's this dance between the two that for me, I know in my practice, I am never in one or another place. I am back and forth between the two. I am constantly cycling down and then back up. And I also wanted to point out that the dark areas, there is a lot going on in there. It's not just black. There is lots of beautiful colors. There's beautiful texture. And yesterday I had said that the darkness was just as beautiful as the light, and I think that's illustrated here in this painting. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that because it goes along with the rest of my topic. I have a poem that I'm going to read, and then we'll break it down a little bit and then move on. The poem is: swallowing disgust until I was bloated with words, slicing my larynx instead of cutting the air between us, because freezing was safer than fighting and flight seemed impossible. Trapped in a culture steeped in the casual misogyny of generations, although I didn't know any of this at the time. Trapped in a cage built of lies. I couldn't see the open door until the veils dropped and my own divinity was revealed, shining like the sun. Right there, as it always was and always will be. I no longer needed someone else to protect me because the truth had set me free. I wrote this after telling Joe that I had nothing to share for today. This was about a week ago. And as soon as I dropped my resistance to what is going on with me, these words just came out. And so this is about emergence. It's about my emerging from cultural norms, the hierarchy of power we've talked about a little bit, where there's a certain group at the tippy top, and then everybody else and everything else is underneath. And sometimes even there's a scramble to try and not be at the bottom. So there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of distress that comes out of this cultural conditioning. And so to talk a little bit about this, to pull it apart a little bit, that first line, swallowing disgust, I used specific words: bloated, slicing my voice box. And this is about invisible self-harm. This is about my decision to swallow rather than disturb the status quo. That whole women should smile and be pleasing. I chose that at great harm to myself, I'm learning. And it's also a freeze response. This is shutdown. And I did not feel safe enough to fight, to say the words. And running or leaving was invisible to me. I did not even know that that was an option. That phrase, culture steeped in generations of misogyny, I'm responding to the current state of affairs and also, generations, centuries of this type of culture. It's ancestral. It is, I think of Jung and the collective unconscious. We carry that from since the very beginning of time. And also, historically, women have been institutionalized for being hysterical, which I personally would say that hysteria was probably a reasonable response to something that happened. Maybe going back to that first line where I swallowed words, that was me avoiding being called hysterical, avoiding that. Burned at the stake for having wisdom, being healers and midwives, and called witches and burned. Beaten and jailed for wanting equal voice, women's suffrage. I mean, this is history. This is actual things that happened, and they're very powerful. I wrote that I couldn't see the open door. So much of this is invisible. It was completely invisible to me. It's like air. And I even now would find it hard to give examples, but as I become aware, I can sense it in myself, the ingrained misogyny that I have swallowed and believed without question. Veils dropping. We've heard this 70,000 veils between myself and the divine. And I think that's my own blindness to my own divinity. I think those 70,000 veils are what keep me from seeing the truth that shines like the sun. It's gotten buried. That truth has been buried under centuries of conditioning that tells me I am underneath those small group, of people at the tippy top, and I am worth less than they are. And I say I am aware that I'm speaking to a group of people who also have heard that messaging. The thing is, though, that truth is also right there in plain sight if I know to look for it. And that's what I meant with the cage door was open and the lies, they were invisible. So this is about moving towards clarity. Another reason I didn't really want to talk about this is because I can't give it to you wrapped up in a nice little package. I'm not done. I am not there. The conditioning runs deep, and I am a work in progress because emergence takes time. So it's a little messy right now. And I would have rather presented it to you all finished, but here we are. So as I started to fret about what in the world I was going to say, I wondered if there was a feminine goddess or deity that might have some wisdom for me. And I started reaching for my divine feminine card deck, my handy dandy deck of cards. And before I even touched it, the name Thecla came to my mind. Now, I only know Thecla's name. I don't know anything else about her. But I looked her up, and in my deck of cards, she is known as the prophetess of true power. And there's the Acts of Paul and Thecla goes back to at least the 2nd century. So we do have an account of her life. And she was from a pretty prominent and wealthy family. And at around the age of 17, she heard Paul preach. And she decided that that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to educate and teach and spread the word of Jesus. But this was absolutely taboo for her time. Women then, as they are now, were expected to marry and have children. That was where their value lay. And she went against all cultural expectations. And for this, she was sentenced to death not once, but twice, and miraculously escaped both times. And instead of living the life that had been predetermined for her, she did spread the word. She lived till she was 90. And this makes me think of the Beguines that Joe has mentioned. And it's something that I had actually asked for, is to be able to start aligning myself with people like Thecla, who pushed back against the cultural norms. She's an example to me of someone to follow. And really what she did was she took back the power that she had given away to society, to the culture, to her family that decided what she was going to do. She took that back and decided it for herself. And I realized that I have also given away my power to the same institutions, and that I can take that back. Today, she is venerated as a saint. She's known as a contemporary to Paul. And I found out that there's a convent of Saint Thecla in Syria, and they still speak Aramaic there, the language of Jesus. So, we want to take a field trip. I think that would be kind of cool. But she leaves me with some questions to sit with. And the questions are, what parts of me have I sacrificed in order to fit in? And am I willing to keep dying this kind of spiritual death? I think that I really had to, it is a life or death decision for me. I may not physically die, but am I willing to die a spiritual death? And these might be questions that you can ask yourself too. I'll repeat them later if, before our meditation. So I was curious to see if maybe there was some more wisdom for me in the cards. Not satisfied with just one answer, just checking. And I ended up drawing the card of Inanna, who is the queen of heaven and earth. And she was a deity in Mesopotamia. And my, elementary school social studies comes back to me, the land between two rivers. It's now present day Iraq. And I have been wanting to tell the story of Inanna for a while. It's a hero's journey, and it's a distinctly feminine one. Yesterday, Joe talked about Meister Eckhart saying that the way down is the way to God. And this is exactly what Inanna does. The story is Inanna's descent. She goes down into the underworld to face her twin sister, Ereshkigal. Ereshkigal is the queen of the underworld. Inanna has to pass through 7 gates in order to get there. And at each gate, she has to take off an item of clothing so that when she finally arrives, she's naked. Ereshkigal is not happy that Inanna has come to the underworld, so unhappy that she kills her sister and hangs her up to dry. However, Inanna has already planned her escape, and she is able to return back to the surface, and she brings Ereshkigal's power with her. So to go into that a little bit, I think that Ereshkigal's is Inanna's shadow self. Her twin is her shadow that lives in the underworld. I think a twin is like a mirror. So Inanna comes face to face with the darkness that is also her. And Ereshkigal represents that darkness that's in all of us. In the hero's journey, she would be the dragon that the hero needs to face. But in this case, we are not trying to slay our shadow. We need to befriend those exiled parts of us. Within that darkness is wisdom. And when we face that darkness and assimilate it, we reclaim the wisdom that's been there all along. It's a thing we haven't been able to see, but it's been there all along. We become stronger and we become more whole. In order to get there, though, we need to shed our ego armor. And so remember, Inanna was a queen. And so she had to take off her crown and her jewels and her robes and all of these adornments that would have identified her as a person of status and stature and wealth. And these would be hard for the ego to give up, especially in our current culture, which just reveres those things. So we need to be willing to let all of that go. And facing the shadow, doing all of this feels fearsome. It does involve a kind of ego death, which is symbolized by Inanna's death. Letting go of something that we believe in, an identity, a way of being. But when we're willing to let go of those, we reap the benefits of wisdom gained, just like Inanna returned to the surface with Ereshkigal's power. When she returns to the surface, it's like she's going through a birth canal, if you think about it, going from the darkness into the light. She's died and she's reborn. When we integrate our shadow sides, we are doing what Meister Eckhart talked about, marrying the opposites, the positive and the negative, the darkness and the light. And this is the way to the via creativa. And this is the way to something new. In my case right now, what I'm talking about is a new paradigm, a new kind of relating, a new kind of culture, a new kind of power sharing, power with instead of power over. And what keeps occurring to me is a play on the saying, as above, so below. I keep thinking, as it is within, so it is without. And as I shift my inner culture, I can see the shift outside. Inanna leaves me with some questions. What have I hidden from myself that keeps me from seeing that the cage door is open? And am I willing to have these things revealed to me? And just one final note, I want to say that when I take the lead, I always make a point of emphasizing the voices of women. And I want to say that there are men that are speaking this language too. And I think it's very important to recognize that as well. If I'm talking about a culture of power sharing, I am not talking about the feminine becoming dominant. And I want to recognize Meister Eckhart as being that man who spoke a truth that was contrary to what the culture at the time dictated, and he was persecuted for it. But he stuck with his truth, and that is an act of courage, just like Thecla. He's an example to me and to all of us of a man who can also walk this path. And Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was mentioned yesterday. Same thing, a contemporary figure who had very similar constraints. I know that I don't own, I'm not the only one who has been suppressed. And he went against convention, and we have a lot of admiration for him now. And one thing I think about all the time is the courage to take those steps. And he was persecuted and he was killed for walking his truth. And so I really want, in this horizontal power structure that I talk about, to empower men as well as women. We all need to do this work because the current status and the current structure is suffocating everyone. And that is my hope. I hope that I've given you some good information to possibly start or continue that journey. So thanks for letting me share.